looks like you're going to be up first. Okay, great. So Brian Cordell, wave your hand so everybody knows who you are. There we go. Yes. Holds an MFA from Vermont College of Fine Arts, and he is the author of the chapbook In Their Final Performance, which looks like this and is available for sale. Yeah. His work can be found in New Haven Review, Cesara, Perfume River Poetry Review, Leveler, Rust and Moth, San Pedro River Review, and Rise Up Review. And Jerry T. Johnson, wave Jerry so everybody knows who you are. There you go. Awesome. Thank you. Is a poet and spoken word artist whose poetry has appeared in a variety of literary publications worldwide. In addition to being the winner of the 2020 Evening Street Press's Sinclair Poetry Prize, Jerry's poetry has also appeared in Burning Word Literary Journal, Great Weather for Media's 2017 and 2020 anthologies, The Long Islander, Walt's Corner, Stray Light Literary Magazine, Barnstorm Literary Journal, Blue Moon Literary and Art Review, and many more. In addition to his published work, Jerry features and performs guest host duties at many spoken word and poetry venues in New York City and Southern Connecticut. So please welcome Brian and Jerry, right? This evening, we are so glad to have you here. So Brian, if you would begin, please.
All right, great. So you hear me okay? Is the volume good? Okay, great. First, just thank you, Laurel, for inviting me to be part of this. I'm thrilled to be actually able to read and share some poems and do that stuff again. So I thought I would start by reading a few poems from the chapbook. It's called In Their Final Performance. All of the poems in the book are about musicians. So I'll start with a couple by a few more well-known musicians. The first poem is a poem about Kurt Cobain. One of my mentors told me at one point that I shouldn't write about Kurt Cobain because it was too cliche. So I took that as a challenge and decided to do it anyway. So this is called Letter Explaining Why I Have Not Written a Poem About Kurt Cobain. Dear Kurt, it's because in my memory, I've got it all wrong. I was certain it was you in the rocking chair, but it wasn't you at all. So I had myself convinced it was Lane Staley, unplugged and endlessly rocking, though that was wrong too. It was because it would have been cliche, the voice, creative force of a generation, self-inflicted death that left a gaping hole in the creative landscape and all of that. I could say any of it was true. I could say any of it was true, but the truth, I couldn't say anything. When you died, I could have been anywhere, holed up in a suburban shopping mall, working in a skate shop, building boards for posers, because I had not yet learned to love a hero. Didn't know what it felt like to have the earth shake beneath my feet, to understand the earth shatters, sometimes from brilliance, sometimes from agony, sometimes from knowing there is no escape. I didn't know how depression can hold you like a cinder block underwater. Until now, I never heard you speak about love, your voice sincere, almost as gentle as silence. While your eyes strained betray emptiness, pointlessness. You always knew it would come to this, and this letter or any poem might as well be sent to cinders, or else buried for all it matters. When I imagine you now, you float not as a child in a pool, innocent and unburdened, but in the dark of space. Your heavy wool sweater unbuttoned hangs like a prophet's robe, arms outstretched. You reach as if for a door, ready to open it and invite the rest of us inside. This next poem is a David Bowie poem. I tried for many years to write a David Bowie poem, failing miserably every time. And then I read Tracy K. Smith's book, Life on Mars, and realized I should probably leave it to the professionals. But then I took another run at it and thought about it differently. Instead of trying to write about Bowie, the man, I took a little bit different approach and talked a little bit more about what's significant, at least to me, about it. So this is called Singularity. This morning, despite the rain, I watched 2 hearses, or maybe 3 on the highway. A long train followed, hazards flashed, and in the last procession, almost in unison, each car moved through the rain ever so slightly out of sync. It was only later, after I made it to work, after I'd run through the rain that cut sideways, only after I sat dripping at my desk, I sat thinking that the gray had weighed down the whole of everything, or at least appeared to lower the sky. And if it hadn't been for the rain, I would have stood beneath it to see how long I could stand the pressure before it pressed me too into the ground. I wondered if they had all been together, the hearses, if they'd all been traveling in the rain to the same saturated plot of land. I don't know that it matters, though now, as I think about it, they probably were not. Anyway, maybe because I was listening to Low, or because it's January again, I remembered 2 years ago, Bowie died while I was asleep on a pull-out couch in a Texas hotel, the last night before driving 3 days home. I wonder sometimes about sound and vision and what it must be like at the center of a black hole, to be forever frozen in time along the event horizon and forever stretched on the other side into inescapable light. These next few poems are from a sequence in the middle of the chapbook about the singer-songwriter named Jason Molina. He was a singer for a band named the Magnolia Electric Company, and he died after a very long, tough battle with alcoholism. So these next few poems are all sort of related to his life and his music. First one I'll read is called Lonesome Valley. Here, under shadows surrendered, hollow notes sink still, even ghosts sleep. So what then am I, awake, watching the North Star and moon? From darkness, one star beckons, while whippoorwill song still echoes, unheard in the lonesome valley. Cry sleep and find me on the ground. Beyond the valley, open sky, and the darkness still. Another night opens the way, an open bottle can hum lullabies. This next one is called Memphis Moon. It also has a reference to the musician Jeff Buckley, who drowned in the Mississippi River. Outside Memphis, the morning moon slides along the strings of dawn and bends in a bod low and watches the earth fall. But from this bench by the bank of the Mississippi, it doesn't feel as if we are going anywhere. Even the river is unbroken and holds its darkness close without regard for the sky or amber light that is soon to come. I've watched them both, moon and river, one forever distant, watchful, and one forever flowing, forever giving itself away, spilling into a gulf, carrying whatever remains afloat out to sea. It's here where the riverboat found Buckley floating, and I think about how the river held him, wrapped her currents around him, and wonder, had he not been spotted or pulled ashore, how far she could have carried him cold and broken as the moon hummed. The sun is almost up now. I sit by the river where they pulled him ashore, waiting for the undertow. Oh, Grace, where have you gone, and where can I find you again? And this is another poem about Jason Molina, probably the one that deals with his alcoholism the most. It's called Talk to Me, Devil, Again. Like echo or reverb, it's in the details, always the details. Like the razor of light along the horizon just before dark, or a crack in the bark years before a branch gives way. Then, of course, there's nothing but gravity, which drags every tree to ground eventually. Or it's like a sliver from a broken glass, imperceptible, but sharp enough to embed in a foot like a splinter, painful enough to dwell, to replay each track, listen for the details that seem to whisper only, this is hell. Whatever sliver of dignity dwells still feels a slow dissolve into the dark. Whatever self-respect goes down hard, and will alone drags one back to a bottle. We're weary, we struggle to chart our way. As if this map showed more than one road, options to weigh, as if there were nights when one drink was really enough, as if every second absent of song could hold us. Silence drags on instead, measure after measure, allowing space for details. And as details, the opening and closing of a door in the dark, an apartment fire, a gash in the head, silent spaces, slivers of time that held asleep a bottle in hand. Hidden, each sliver of hope forgotten beneath a dark, endless song, and the way we must sometimes long to hear the devil's voice, the dark tenor, softer than expected, sadder. His hum, a blues low enough to catch the tremor, the reluctance, to understand the details and know it isn't malevolence, but what we share, which drags us into his fall. Gravity, inertia, despair, gin, everyone a drag on our inclination to flow beyond self-destruction. What sliver of moon still hangs over my heart. Whatever the details, for whatever reason, it has hung itself rather than make its way across the heavens. As if it knows we have both gone far enough. Another drink or not, tomorrow's sky can only be dark. But other than a few familiar ghosts, what is wrong with the dark? What light is needed aside from the ember of a last cigarette drag and the certainty of knowing this is it, that you've had enough? There can be no new trace of light along the horizon, no sliver, but then there is morning and piercing sunlight and no real way to describe the night. Only the devil remembers the details long enough to worry about the dark. And anyway, details from this distance only drag and splinter until wasted away. I'll read a couple of poems now that aren't from the chapbook, that don't have anything to do with musicians, and then if there's time, cycle back to one or two more of those. So this one is called Classroom. I'm in one of the older rooms on campus, only distinguishable from the newer rooms by having been less recently painted white. Every wall appears cast in shadow, though the fluorescent should somehow pierce through the grime, should bleach them in harsh light. The scruff marks I notice along the lower wall are from my shoes, and I'm sure from others, soles lifted and pressed to rest as we lean back against the whiteboard. There was a time I tried to teach my students about description. I'd make them describe the room in metaphor and other obvious figures of speech, a weak exercise which garnered weaker responses, which always pointed to the nondescript clock at the back of the room, the wires pulled either from the ceiling or the wall, where the media console had once been. Almost always the room was a prison or asylum. But once, a soldier between tours in Iraq wrote for an hour about the ledge along the window and imperfections dragged down through the glass, through time. I don't even see walls anymore, or the clock, which stopped moving sometime in the last few minutes or the last few months. I turn the lights out, turn them back on. Nothing has changed. Only now I notice what's missing. There's no closet in this room, no place for me to try to cram us all into when the shooting begins. This poem's a slightly different tone than some of the rest that I've been reading. It's called Invariant T, T standing for the physics symbol for time. We really shouldn't be here. And I don't mean the breaking and entering, get your ass thrown in prison sort of shouldn't be here. No, I'm talking about the cosmic, we should have been destroyed by antimatter long before we ever existed sort of not being here. That is, if you can trust the scientists, who seem to me too reckless at times with their slamming of subatomic particles into one another at God knows what speeds just to see what happens or happened millennia ago, creating collisions and tiny gravitational vortices that I've read could swallow the earth. But the beginning should have been the end, a big bang and instant whimper. Antimatter should annihilate. But they say now there is symmetry, a balance in the universe where there shouldn't be, unless the universe were to cease to be. But here it is. And time is invariant. It moves forward and anti-time turns us backward. And at some point in the middle, we stop to hold our own hands and look ourselves over in the mirror. We too become invariant matter, antimatter, symmetry surrounding us, always when there is something there that shouldn't be, which is why sometimes you have to kill a rat. And I'm not talking about Tony Soprano offing a snitch kind of rat, but the kind that has to be beaten to death with a rubber mallet because it's stuck to a glue trap between the washer and dryer. Moving it any other way may break it loose. Action, reaction, a force acted upon, and all of that. And always there's another rat to take its place. Something scurries in the dark all around you in your mother's house, which has poison everywhere, in the corner behind the piano, around the edges of the hutch, in the multiple open jars of peanut butter on the counter, the table, near the stove, waiting for someone to forget which is the one safe choice left, which sandwich leads to annihilation. Because there's as much time ahead as there is behind. Because with one parent dying and the other almost dead, sometimes you have to kill a rat and face the matter. In front of you, whether you like it or not. Time is invariant. At this moment, as much of me is moving toward tomorrow as moves toward yesterday. Maybe this is what keeps us safe. Maybe this is symmetry. Somewhere under the ground in Switzerland, scientists may soon better understand our end as they move ever closer to our beginning. All right, I think I have time for just one more. Thank you. So I'll end with this one. This is an older poem, but it's the first poem in the chapbook. And this poem is dedicated to my friend Ernie Gonzalez. What do you remember? Bats spread across the sun from under a bridge, silhouettes against the red glow of dusk. Moments later, empty sky, dark blue shading darker and soon to black. People lined up to see them, hear the screech and flap of leather wings creating their own quiet thunder. But this is a diversion, not a memory. What I meant to say was I've never seen the bats at South Congress. What you meant to ask was what have I missed most since leaving? But I can't answer that question now without saying something trivial about enchiladas verdes and how New York salsa doesn't make me sweat. Because for some reason I can't talk about honky tonks or listening to music for free in the parking lot behind Stubbs after a night of drinking and scouring the city in a Volkswagen van, or how every day made me wish I was a musician or artist or poet, and how most days all I wanted was to sit and drink coffee and read on cafe patios, and how this made me feel sometimes like Hemingway, abroad and living life, or how sometimes this made me feel like Hemingway, alone, needing a drink, and thinking about all there is to lose in this world. Out here, the sky must darken on its own, knowing that what it reveals is always an end. The way you must know now, somewhere deep in the heart, there's sometimes a trembling, a seizing, then nothing more. Thank you.
Thank you, Brian. Those were amazing.
Thank you, I appreciate it.
So poignant and touching. So I'm looking forward to talking about them with you in a few minutes.
Sure.
Next up is Jerry Johnson. So Jerry, the stage is yours, as you like to say.
Thank you, Laurel. If everybody can hear me, just wave your hand. Okay, great. Brian, thank you so much. Wonderful job. Enjoyed your work very much. And thank you, Laurel, for inviting me to Poets in Conversation. I really appreciate this opportunity. I'm going to read from my book, Poets Should Not Write About Politics. Right, let's see, where do we start? Train. My train rolls slowly into 30th Street Station. The afternoon transitions towards a shade of dusk. Philly's skyline glistens in the wash of a departed sun. I stare at glass buildings whose panes shimmer. I'm wearing those headphones which cover your ear. Black, sleek, and cheap. The $10.99 kind. Listening to Miles, Pharaoh's dance, I'm dazed by shimmering. And the trumpet joins the bass and the alto sax on stage. The electricity of the piano flows like a river, melancholy and melodious. My train stops and the drums push the band towards crescendo. I pause my song to bid new friends, earlier made farewell, they depart. I press play, the crescendo starts to climb. All aboard, we leave and we find night has taken the helm. The crescendo climbs, the stars overcome the darkness. I overcome the darkness, my grief, the darkness, my soul, and my train moves on, and my train moves on and on. Right? Next poem. Winter continues. As my train glides upon an electrified rail through a tunnel of snow-laden rock, swans perch on a half-frozen lake while ducks skate effortlessly on thin ice. It is another day of winter, and the cold commands quiet from the presence of nature. I am quiet too. I am subdued as my train makes haste over frosted rail. All right, the next poem, The Cold War Games. It was late October 1997 in Moscow. My tour of duty in Russia was winding down. My boss and I just finished dinner at a restaurant positioned just 4 miles from the Kremlin. After dinner, we sipped vodka and talked about fast-moving sports cars. The car he owned was very sporty. It was a slick, silver American model. He left it at home in the USA because it was much too costly to bring it into Russia. Moreover, he was afraid to have it stolen. Stolen, like many other fine Western cars, owned by many other Westerners, spending time building factories, refurbishing warehouses, furnishing distribution centers, buying delivery trucks, installing computers, configuring software, counting Russian rubles, counting Czech crowns, counting Polish zlotys, counting Hungarian forints, wherever the former Soviet Union abode, there we were with all our technical toys playing round after round of business roulette, deluded into thinking that the Cold War games were over. Right. Okay. Poets should not write about politics. I've been told that poets should not write about politics. Poets should write about daisies and hearts. Poets should write about dandelion petals blown by the wind. Poets should write about bison grazing in a vale. Poets should write about toddlers playing with puppies. Poets should write about kittens chasing balls of string. But I cannot ignore the worst of this world. The worst continue to lie, and they are believed. The worst sow discord and hatred, and they are loved. The worst murder and are granted clemency to live. The worst steal and are rewarded with riches. The worst rape and are honored with nobility. The daisies wither in early spring. The heartstrings fray and rot. The dandelion fields are scorched by wildfires. Extinction threatens the bison, the kittens gaunt, emaciated, starved toddlers in homeless streets wail. Yet I've been told, poets should not write about politics. Poets should not write about innocent bloodshed. Poets should not write about social conflict. Poets should write about daisies, bison, toddlers, kittens chasing balls of string. But I cannot ignore the worst of this world. Thank you. My next poem is Daisies. Ancient Celtic legend claims daisies are symbols of innocence and purity. The Norse gave daisies to new mothers, celebrating new life through childbirth. Roman myth, Daisies, Daisy's namesake, became Bellis to escape bottomless pursuits. Daisies appear everywhere. Urban slang, Hollywood westerns, Shakespeare plays, in verse written by a few poets. I extend to you a handful of daisies. Take the long green stems from my clutch. Enjoy the fragrance, their innocence, their purity, their escape. Right. Might need to fasten your seatbelt on this one. This one is going to be Oh, a little heavy social commentary is in this one, the next one. Although I should not have to. Sometimes I'm wound tight like twisted twine made of bungee rope, coil like a rattler ready to spring, stretched taut by the finger of an archer, aimed to launch the lust of my overheated rage. Then I wind my temper down and I forgive my brother for the robbery, for the rape, for the theft, for the murder, for the slavery. Now, with controlled disgust, I can explain why the N word hurts, although I should not have to. I can explain why boy does not work, although I should not have to. I can explain why monkey is not funny, although I should not have to. I can explain why your conscience is lost if you are still comfortable with these terms, although I should not have to. Thank you. First, I had my bookmark. Oh, here we go. Last poem is a song. This was the hardest one for me to read. And I've actually read it in public a couple of times, but it's a tough one. The title of this one is A Song of Remembrance for Mama. Greenville, South Carolina, 1961. I'm 5 years old. It's 6 o'clock in the morning. Mama drags me out of my bed, makes me dress in my good clothes. She says, come on, boy, we're going downtown. While dipping a big spoonful of grits from the sputtering pot and serving it on my plate, Mama slices a slab of butter with that big fat butter knife and lays it over the steamy hot mound. Don't waste time, boy, finish your grits. And Mama, I can hear you now saying, boy, stop wasting time. Boy, stop wasting time, keep on writing. I finished my grits. Are you done? Mama asks as she wipes down the kitchen counter. Yes, Mama, I answered. We leave the house after Mama locks up the front door. We walk down Old Paris Mountain Road. I glance back at a nightclub named Earl's, and I think about the time that my uncle sang there. My uncle nailed Otis Redding's song so well. He was a local celebrity, but Earl was so known for not paying. That's why my uncle called it quits, singing at Earl's. Well, what you looking at, Mama asked. Nothing, Mama, I answered. I looked up at her with love, respect, affection. She is strong, focused on her mission to provide, while so many so-called men who lived in the neighborhood were so absent. We stop at the bus stop and we wait. The bus pulls up slowly. Gray smoke fumes out of a rust-colored exhaust. We board. Mama instructs me that we are sitting at the front of the bus. All is quiet, all is serious as we ride from the outskirts to downtown. There is no conversation. Stanch, grit lips, cold stares, no smiles, and a few eyes rolling. Mama pulls the cord, the bus halts. We walk for a long time after we get off. The noise of revved car engines, blowing horns, loud groaning trucks bang, a cacophony on the membrane of my eardrums. The harsh exhaust of downtown traffic burn my eyes. I sniffle, I sneeze, I frown. Mama wipes my eyes with a handkerchief she pulls from her big pocketbook. She takes me by the hand and says, come on. We walk into a building. We stand in a line that is waiting at a sign that reads vaccinations. Smallpox, long a scourge of old civilizations, was dealt with by vaccine in the 50s and the 60s. Mama takes measures to ensure her firstborn child is inoculated and protected before he starts the first grade in the coming year. A song of remembrance for Mama, a song of remembrance for mothers. Mama never had the opportunity to sit behind a corporate desk, but I'm sure if she were afforded the chance, she would have done very well. Yes, while we pursue our greatness and while we pursue our dreams, let us not forget mommy, mom, mama, mom, mother, madre, May, Matka, Manika, Mana, Maher, Okasan, Anya, Mazazi, and so many more who bore so much for our future. back to the vaccination line. It is my turn now. The nurse rolls up the sleeves of my shirt, gently, quickly, sticks the needle into my arm, extracts it. Mama winces. I'm brave. Mama smiles. The nurse smiles again, wipes down my shoulder with a cotton ball doused with alcohol. I wince. The nurse applies a Band-Aid, rolls my sleeve back into its place. Mom and I leave. We walk out of the building into a blazing sunshine, courtesy of a deep south kind of summer. The heat rises from the asphalt and the concrete, and my head swims from the mirage. Mama is smiling, taking me by the hand, guiding me through the sweltering oppression. I look up, my focus sharper. I see faded words from a not too distant past inscribed on a building that reads white only. Mama looks at the sign, and then Mama looks at me, and Mama says, come on, child, pay that sign no mind, pay that sign no mind, pay that sign no mind. Thank you. And thanks, everyone.
Thank you, Jerry. That was wonderful. I was listening to you, and I thought about how both of you this evening have sort of tapped into such deep wells of pain in our culture, and that those are really important things to write about and to think about. So thank you for that. One of the reasons that I wanted to have you both together is that you are both so musically oriented in your work. Brian, you are sort of literally working with a series of musicians, perhaps stepping into their voices, thinking about their lives and their deaths. And Jerry, your work, your language is so musical, and I think that's something that's really sort of fundamental to spoken word poetry. So I was just hoping that you could each talk a little bit about the function of music in your creative process, what that meant for you, and you know, kind of how it works its way into your language and your presentation. Okay. I don't care who starts, you can raise your hand and just go. Great.
No, I can start. Yeah, music is it's a driver behind the way I write. There are musicians who I love to listen to coming up, and that's why I started writing. Curtis Mayfield, Sly Stone were two of my favorite lyricists coming up, and I always wanted to write like that. I studied their words before I studied Langston Hughes, and I was very, very and you know, their lyrics and the way that their lyrics flowed with the music that they played, it really impressed me, and really had a lot of it really influenced the way that it influences the way that I write. As I moved over from soul and rock to jazz, Miles Davis, also his music influenced me. A few songs that he's done influenced the way that I write. And to end, so like Brian can talk to it as well. One night, I was at a Stanley Clarke concert at the Blue Note Jazz Club. And the way he stepped up to the stage and just got down to business really had an impact on this. I say, when I get on stage and read, I want to, no fanfare, no playing around. I just want to get up and get down to business, get right to work. So yes, music and jazz and a few artists in the rock and soul scene who also are very good writers, in my opinion, had a great influence on me.
Thanks. Now, before Brian goes, can I just ask a little follow-up to that? Do you find that you hear their phrasings or certain I don't know, rhythms that are in that original music that you've picked up and incorporated into your work, or that you're, that you're playing with when you're actually writing?
Yeah, what I appreciate about those artists, especially Miles and especially Stanley Clark, is something I call the change up. I like for my work to ebb and flow, ebb and flow. I like for it to take a direction and then surprise you. And that's what they do if they're with their art. Miles was very good at surprising you. In one of his songs that I quote in one of my poems, and that is Pharaoh's Dance, he's going in one direction and he's driving with a certain beat, and then he changes course, and he does it so well. And I try to do that with my poetry. And yes, I'll have a rhythm in my head, but the change up is what I love to do.
Okay, great, thanks. Brian, how about you?
Yeah, part of it, I think, was I grew up with just music around. My father played various instruments and was always listening to music. And then as I got older, I was just, whether it was listening to music on the radio, CDs, whatever, going out to see live music, it was just always part of the background noise. It was something I was always paying attention to. And I think with the writers in particular or the musicians in particular that I wound up writing about for the chapbook, there was something about not just their music, but also their deaths that went along with it. I think I didn't realize probably until after I finished it and was reading back through it that a lot of what was going on in it was actually talking maybe more about my father than it was the musicians that I was actually writing about. And so that musical connection there. But I think especially with Jason Molina, who takes up such a big part of the book, his writing was just, to me, very powerful. And it was deeply sad, deeply moving. And I felt like I had a lot of similarities in terms of the types of imagery that I would use, writing about stars, moon, all these things that he was writing about in his music were things that I had been writing about off and on for a long time. And so it was just kind of a natural fit for me. And then I think with all of these musicians, one of the things that I'm always drawn to is the lyrics, is looking at how they say things, the way they turn a phrase, or the way that they kind of push ideas forward. And I tried to bring in with these poems the sort of sense of repetition that you get from a melody or a chorus that cycles back. So I think that's probably a lot of how I approach these, or what the influence was. And a lot of them were just musicians that I just really loved, that through, one way or another, whether it be illness or self-inflicted, were lost. And so it was a way to kind of connect back to that music and pay tribute to it in a way.
Nice. That's really nice. So my follow-up question for you is actually about, I'm hoping I've got this right, the Jason Molina section that's in the middle. And I noticed in that section that you're using a lot of forms, sestina and villanelle and prose poems and so on. So sort of in the same way that Jerry's addressing, it's the form of the music, right, that he's mimicking or playing with in his work. Can you talk a little bit about why you chose some of those forms and what it's like to work with those? Because I teach those and my students are always like, I can't believe you're making me do this.
Yeah, sure. It almost started by accident. I wrote the first two poems and one of them just came out, and when I edited it down, I realized this was a very loose sonnet. And then the second one just naturally felt like a prose poem. And at that point, I felt like I knew this was a 9-poem sequence. Each title is the name of a title on one of Magnolia Electric Company's albums. So it basically follows the album. So I knew I had to write 9 poems, and I had started 2 with forms. And so I felt like now I have to finish that. I have to go forward. I wasn't terribly comfortable writing in a lot of these forms because I had always done free verse, had always stayed away from it. Anytime I tried to write a villanelle, it was just a miserable experience.
Hey, they're hard.
They are. And so part of it was just a challenge to myself to see if I could do it. And in the end, there were some, like the villanelle that's in there was tough to get through and get it down and get it to where I felt comfortable enough to include it. Others came more easily than I would have expected. The Sestina was probably one of the easiest poems to write in that section because it just, the repetition of the words just kind of lent themselves to this free flowing idea. But the further I got into it, the more I started thinking about them as songs. Songs have these musical structures underneath. They follow specific patterns. Those patterns repeat, the sounds repeat, the chords repeat. And so I tried to choose a lot of forms that used repetition to sort of bring that into it and to try to create different musical styles, different musical songs with the structure of the poems.
Yeah, cool. That's
so
interesting. Go ahead.
I was gonna say, yeah, it was, some of them were very difficult, but it was interesting to work through them and sort of challenge myself in that way and get a feel for something else.
Yeah. Well, I like how you're describing it growing sort of organically as you went along, that didn't go in necessarily with that idea, but that it grew, and that sometimes, right, the material demands a form of us, and we hope we have the skills to
I hope I
the
pulled
challenge.
it off.
Yeah, you did. You pulled it off. So actually, since you kind of brought that up, one of the other things that I was interested in, since you have both put together full-length collections of work, is maybe to ask you to talk a little bit about arranging that, right? Because that's a task all on its own. That's very different from writing the individual poems.
I'll go first, and that's the key. What goes first in the book is, and that was easy. I said, okay, put your title poem at the beginning. And I said, and at that point, I said, all right, now what goes last? That's just my method. What goes last? And I went back and forth on that. I really went back and forth on that. And I got advice, actually. It was my wife who actually told me that I should put the long piece at the end. And actually, the publisher loved that I did that because it has a very strong ending. And once I figured out what goes first and what goes last, what I did was, a lot of the pieces have a lot of social commentary attached to it. But what I tried to do is I tried to do something that's not so socially involved, and then go with the hard social commentary. Go back to something that's not so socially involved, then go back to the strong social commentary. So I tried to do that balancing act back and forth. That way I could keep the reader, rather than doing a whole lot of strong content type of poems, just kind of keep the e-reader interested. So that was my approach on that, was to alternate back and forth between strong social commentary and poems that I call just nice poems that have nothing to do with any social content. Although some people disagree with me. Some people say that some of the nicer poems do have political indirection.
Maybe you just can't escape it, right? Just in you.
So that was my approach with that one.
Okay, great. So a little breather, right, to kind of balance.
Yeah. I wanted to give the reader a rest, in a sense. Yeah. Before I came back with something that had strong content attached to it.
Right, Brian, how about you?
Sure. Mine, I don't know that I would be able to take this approach again with another book, because it sort of, these poems sort of lent themselves to the structure. I knew I had this 9-poem sequence that was going to be sort of the heart of it. And as I started thinking about that, I was thinking about musicians who play, who go back and sort of perform an album live. And that gave me the idea to sort of think about it as a concert. So I have the opening of the book is structured as sort of the opening act. And I think I called it like the cover band. And so it's got some poems. The David Bowie poem is there. There's a Townes Van Zandt poem, a John Lennon poem. And so it kind of structures itself around a few poems that sort of warm things up. Then it shifts over to the main act, which is the 9-poem sequence. And then it ends with an encore, a little break, the Kurt Cobain poem, and there's a Tragically Hip poem in there. And then it comes back to one sort of final Jason Molina poem, just to sort of wrap it up. The harder part was the sort of constriction of the 9 poems in the middle, because I was locked into the titles because I wanted to follow the sequence of the album, which meant I had to find a way, as almost more as I was writing them, to make sure that one kind of led into the next in a way that made sense. I wanted to try to create an arc that sort of opened in the beginning and then had closure at the end, and had a smooth flow in the middle. And so with each poem in that, I was starting almost with sequence and trying to work backwards in a way. And so that's sort of how I came about it.
Oh, that's pretty complicated. Yeah,
Great. Yeah, it was. I like I said, I don't think it would work again, but for this, it just made the most sense.
All together. Yeah, cool. All right, so I would like to open it up to questions from the audience. If you guys want to unmute yourselves and share your question, or if you want to put something in the chat and have me ask it, either way, it's fine. But does anyone have a question for either of the writers this evening? Go for it. Victoria, why don't you just unmute yourself and talk? No. Oh, okay. No one? Oh, Jerry. Martina wants to, Victoria wants to know, is it the name of the poem about Russia that you want to know? Yes? What's the name of the poem that you wrote about Russia?
The Cold War Games is the title. And that poem is actually based on my time in Moscow. And my boss and I were talking about his Porsche, and we were sipping vodka after dinner. Oh, well, I lived on Tverskaya. Is where I lived. Yeah. All right.
Other questions?
Is there a
Nothing? Yes, go ahead.
All right. Is there a place where we can read all the poems on the internet? All the ones that you read today?
Well, both of the writers have published books. And so, writers like to eat. And so we prefer to have people buy our books so we can eat.
Okay.
I have another question for Jerry. What advice would you give to a new writer, someone who is just starting? But actually, either Brian or Jerry could answer that,
Yeah,
or both.
We both could probably answer that one. Start writing. First of all, write. And second of all, workshops. If there are workshops in your neighborhood, go to those workshops so that you can have other people read your writing and provide feedback. And the last thing is read. A writer that doesn't read is not much of a writer. You're going to have a good reading habit. So those are the main 3 things that I focus. Brian probably can add more to this.
I don't know. I think my response would have been very similar to yours, Jerry. But first is just write as much as you can, write, as often as you can. And mainly as you're writing, when you're starting off, don't worry about how good it is. Don't worry about whether or not it's got mistakes in it. Just get the ideas down and see where they take you. You can always go back and edit and refine from there. And yeah, I would second the notion to just read as much as you can. The more you read, the more you pick up and soak up, and then you can begin to emulate, and then you begin to move on and find your own voice and your own way of doing things.
Yeah, and I might add to that too, that read a lot of poetry if you want to be a poet, and read a lot of fiction if you want to be a fiction writer, but also read things about how to construct poems and how to construct fiction, so that when you're reading, you can see what the writer is doing, right? And I think that that's really helpful. I'm taking a photography class right now, and I can look at a photograph and I can say, wow, that's a beautiful photograph, but I'm still just learning what it takes to make it a beautiful photograph, right? So I think that's the same with writing, right? We can encounter something that we think is gorgeous, but if we want to reproduce it, we've got to try to figure out how the writer is doing what they're doing. And that's, I think, part of the challenge too, that I would encourage you to explore, right? That's part of the fun of it. Okay, now, Caitlin, you said you had a two-part question to add on to this. You want to put it in the chat, or do you want to unmute? Here we go. You guys initially uncomfortable with, were you, I guess, initially uncomfortable with sharing your work? And if so, how did you overcome this to share and publish what you've done? That's a great question. Right, Caitlin's in my creative writing class right now, so that's a really good question.
I guess I'll go first with that one. When I first started doing readings and stuff, I was terrified. I'd get up at a podium and my hands would just shake, and I was terrified that I was gonna just get up there and embarrass myself horribly. And it really took a lot of time to get through, just doing it more, getting more experience with it. What really helped was just getting more confident with my writing, getting feedback both in workshops like the ones Jerry mentioned, and with readers that I know and trust, letting me know that what I had was okay. For me, I think teaching, I teach, so having that experience of being able to get in front of a classroom and talk helped also. But mostly it was about confidence. I just had to get to a point where I felt a lot more comfortable with my voice and with my writing style. And even still, every once in a while, I'm more comfortable getting up in person. Doing this on Zoom actually gave me a little bit of hesitation, because I just thought, I don't know how the format is going to change things. And so this was a new experience, doing it this way rather than reading in front of a live audience. So I'm sure Jerry, again, probably has more to add to
that. Along the same lines, my first live feature in New York City in June of 2015, my nerves were so bad, I lost my voice before.
Oh no.
And my head was banging. Fortunately, my wife was with me. She went to the first program. And so we stopped at a Pershing Square, right across from Grand Central. She said, give him some tea with honey. So I sucked down several cups of tea with honey, and my voice, slowly came back. And then I popped a few Tylenol and went down. And when I got on stage, the thing is, just read the poem. Just start reading. Let the poem do the work for you. Let the content do the work for you. The content will help you get over those nerves, and focus on the content yourself as you share it with your audience. And I did. I had that. My first live event was very, very good. And after the program was over, I couldn't talk anymore. My voice went back to it was gone. So, but the key is focus on the poem or focus on the writing, and just tell it and share it, and go for it. And you'll find those nervous feelings time that, and you know, a little nervousness is always good, in my opinion. If you have a little nervousness, that's great. That's great. You know, use that to your advantage. You know, try to turn that nervousness into as much energy as you possibly can. But you know, get up and just start reading when you stand in front of that audience. And each time you do it, the more you do it, the more you get over that nervousness.
Yeah, Nike wasn't wrong, right? Just do it.
Just do it. That's it.
Just do it. Okay, I have another question for both of you. When you write, do you have a vision or idea of whom you are speaking to? And does that change from one poem to another? Jerry, why don't you start this time?
That is a good question. I had to look at my table of contents from the book to see who was I speaking to. Actually, most times I believe that, and again, sounds strange, but I think I'm speaking to the universe when I write, not just to one. I'm speaking to the universe when I write. Yeah, I'm speaking to everyone in every piece that I write. So there's not just one group, or it's just I'm speaking to the world.
Okay, cool.
Yeah, I would agree with that. I don't think much about audience when I'm writing. It's almost, for me, a better approach if I'm writing them for myself. You know, when I go into it, I'm not thinking about whether or not anybody else is ever going to read this, hear this. It's just, you know, I take the idea, see where it leads me, and that's where I wind up. And then from there, it's, you know, for the universe, as Jerry said, you know, whomever might be, you know, willing to pick it up and read it, or at a reading, or whatever the case may be. But yeah, for me, audience doesn't really come into it. You know, there are some that like the classroom poem, or like I'm sure a lot of Jerry's poems that are politically minded, where, you know, there's a message there, and there's certainly, you know, an intended target, maybe might be better term than audience, but you know, a place where the poem is directed to, but yeah, not a specific audience or type of audience that way.
Okay, great, thank you. And then Caitlin, I'm not quite sure what you are doing here. You said any exercises that can help with this. Are you talking about sharing your work, exercises to help with sharing your work? Yes. Okay. So I don't know. Exercises for, like, I don't know. Deep breathing.
Deep breathing, maybe. I found early on wine helped.
Oh, that's a good one. There you go. All right.
But
exercises to build up confidence.
Yeah.
Which
But
I think is, yeah.
The best thing that you can do, and I still do this. I spent, you know, an hour or so doing this before we started tonight. Best thing you can do is just read through your work as much as possible. Get to the point where you're comfortable with it, where you know it well enough that even if you don't have it memorized, you're reading it off the page, you know enough about how the rhythms work and how the sounds work and how the lines flow, so that you expect what's coming. Because a lot of times, if you're nervous, if it's a newer poem, you're not familiar with it, that's where you might stumble more, or you might lose your place, things like that. So just the main thing that I do, and that helped me in the past, but that still helps me before a reading, is just read through your work several times, read through it until you feel comfortable. Or if you have a family member or friend that you're comfortable reading with, start by reading to them and get comfortable reading to just one or two people. And then at some point, you just have to challenge yourself and get up there and do it.
Yeah, good.
I read in front of the pots and pans of my kitchen. I rehearse. That's helpful. But the other thing is open mics, and the more open mics you do, the better you feel about doing it. And also workshops. Read your work aloud to the people that are sitting in the workshops. The more you do that, the more comfortable you'll begin to feel about reading your work. Those are the exercises that you can do. I do a lot of rehearsing at home. Although here lately, I haven't done many rehearsals as much as I used to rehearse every day. Now it's down to like twice a week. But rehearsals at home, that helps you kind of get the feeling for how you're going to do it. And also rehearse in front of people at open mics and at workshops.
Great advice.
The open mic reminded me also that one thing to keep in mind when you start doing open mics or going to other things is that the audience is there because they want to hear what you have to say. And generally you have a very receptive audience that's going to be very supportive, and they just want to hear your point of view. They want to hear your art. They just want to hear how you present things. And so they're going to be very supportive. And if you stumble, if you miss a beat, if you lose your place, they're going to be fine with it. And they're going to, applaud and come up afterwards and tell you that they enjoyed it.
Cool.
I agree with that 100% too. Yeah, the audience is usually very warm and loving and very supportive.
Great. Good. Well, I don't see any more questions. Does anybody else have another question? All right. Well, Brian and Jerry, thank you so much for doing this. This was terrific. And your work was fabulous. If you guys want to unmute and give them a little clap or say thank you, that would be perfectly wonderful.
I have a question though before we finish.
Oh yeah, go.
I was wondering, when you talk about political injustice, if it's, do you write to educate others or do you write to just get it out there? If that makes sense.
Great question.
Yes, it is.
Great question. And I think I do write to educate others, at least share an opinion with others. I think the reason why I did this book was just, there's just so much noise in the world, so much noise, so much hateful noise. And I said, okay, I want to speak back. I want to talk back and push back. We can't just let one side have all the words that are out there. I felt that, I felt that it was time that a poet basically say, look, it's not like that. It's not like that. It's what it is. And this is my opinion. So yes, I am trying to educate the universe on some of the hateful language, some of the hateful actions that we see and hear every day.
Yeah.
That's great. Thanks, Genia. Okay. All right. Cindy, thank you so much for hosting us. We had a great time.
Thank you. This was wonderful.
Thank you. And thanks to everybody for joining. And Laurel and Cindy, thank you so much for hosting this program.
Yeah,
Yeah,
thanks
thank
for
you
being
all for
here.
listening, and thank you for setting this up. It was
Yeah,
really
you
great.
bet. I hope the Zoom worked for you, Brian.
Yes, I made
Good.
it through, survived.
You made it through. All right. Have a
Thank
great
you.
night, everyone. Thanks for coming.
Good
And
night.
before you leave, we're going to do this again in 2 months, December 8th, right, Cindy? I
Yeah.
think.
Yeah.
And it's going to be 2 female poets, Courtney Davis, who's the poet laureate in Bethel, and was a nurse, and she's just fabulous. And Sally Bloomis Dunn, who's a writer who teaches at Manhattanville, and she's also really wonderful. So if you can make it back in December, I would love to see you here again. Thanks for coming.
Yeah. I will.
Good night.
Good night.
Thank you, everyone.
Good night.
Everyone. All right.